think you can see me. Can you hear me? I think we got good afternoon. Oh, this is last week. Hey, everybody. Hope you can hear me. There we go. All right, let's turn this around. Ta-da! Oh. Let's see if I can get it set. All right, I'm actually live. And as you know, I come on live a couple of minutes early and trying to get time for folks to catch that we're live. So I kind of jibber jabber and do a few other things while we are getting actually out there on the internet. It usually takes, it's really interesting. Technology is so interesting. When I broadcast these Faith-Filled Fridays, it's like our Sunday broadcast where it goes to 3 different sites at the same time. And it takes a minute and a half, sometimes at least, for the signal to get out to you. So most of the time, like on Sundays, like on today, what you see is about a minute and a half. So if you want me to tell you how things end, quick, give me a text or a call, because I'm a minute and a half ahead of you. Isn't that weird to think? Dee Dee, I see you're watching. How nice. I really appreciate that you are always with us. It's good to see you. Hi, Ann Larrabee. Nice to have you with us. Stella Hotchkiss. I love that you hop online. I miss you, lady. I hope you're doing well. So, if you don't know him, I can check in on the Facebook page for those who are watching, and sometimes it tells me who's here and who's watching. So Benny Boy is online with us. So it's nice to see you all come online. I'm just going to give a few extra seconds because I came on later than I usually do. As I said, I usually try to come on several minutes early just for the signal to get out, for you to get notification that I'm here and ready for another Faith-Filled Friday. Jerry, the Vandenbosches are with us. How nice. Let me just check and make sure I can hear. All right. Dee Dee, I see you're watching. How nice. I really appreciate that you are always with us. Yep, you can hear me. I can tell. Well, it is high noon over here in my office. Bless you all for joining me for another installment of Faith-Filled Friday. Need some extra prayers today on our computer system for projection on Sunday. The laptop that we usually use for doing our projection system just busted, as they want to do right when all the guests are coming, right? So we are in the process of trying to scramble and get things fixed and ready for not only Sunday, but for our memorial service tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock for Bob DeReese. We will be live and online, and hope you will be with us in or from the sanctuary for either event this weekend. The Men of Faith breakfast this Wednesday. I talked to the men about one of my favorite stories and one of my least favorite stories, which is really the same story. It's the story of Noah. You find it in Genesis chapter 9 with all of the rain that Tucson has been experiencing lately. Nearly 12 inches of rain officially recorded. Some parts of town obviously have had more. The mountainside, the street side, the desert side, it looks like Minnesota here. It's so green and it's just lovely. And of course, our second thought is what happens in next fire season, but we'll deal with that when that happens. Anyway, in all the rains, I couldn't help but think of Noah and the flood that he experienced. And I shared at the Men of Faith breakfast, and I shared on the Wednesday message that sometimes God calls us to do some things that we are not prepared to do. We aren't prepared for it. Noah was not a builder of boats. That's not why he was chosen to do what he was called to do. We don't have any record of that. We don't have him as any record of him being in animal husbandry or anything to be able to care for all the animals that he had on the ark. We just know that God chose him and empowered him to do what he needed to do. And see, part of the lesson in the awfulness of the story about God drowning the rest of creation, which is just an awful thing. I just have a hard time imagining God really doing that. But according to the story, that's what happened. One of the things I do learn that's a positive from it is that God calls us into some places that we are totally unprepared for. And the good news is, if God calls us, then God will give us what we need to do the task. Noah may not have known what a cubit was or how to build an ark, but he soon discovered. By the way, traditionally a cubit, I have to figure out this, was the measurement of your forearm. That was a cubit. Now, whose arm they measured, I don't know, because forearms have different lengths, but that was it. It was about the average forearm was a cubit. So Noah, who was unprepared for the task of building an ark, actually did a great job and followed God and did what God empowered him to do. Today, I want to talk to you about Noah's family. I love them. Mrs. Noah and his 3 sons and their spouses. And one of the things I learned from the story of Noah is that sometimes we're called into leadership by God and therefore empowered to do it even though we aren't prepared for it. But sometimes we're called to be a support system. Do you really think that Noah did everything on his own? If Noah and his family were the folks who survived, then you better bet that when Noah got that sense of calling from God, that he let his wife know. Can you imagine that night? Noah coming home. By the way, Mrs. Noah, God has called me to build this ginormous ark and take 2 of every kind of animal onto it. And we're going to be on it and be saved from the flood. And can you imagine her reaction? Can you imagine the reaction of his 3 sons when he told them that they're going to need to help him? Can you imagine the reaction of their wives who married into this nutty family? I mean, it wasn't raining when God talked to Noah about their impending flood and what he needed to do. And I'm always so impressed that there's no record that Mrs. Noah left him. There's no record that any of the 3 sons or their spouses ran away. What we hear of actually in the story is that they stayed and they were with him. And sometimes I think that God calls us into support roles. And we don't get the credit. We don't know Mrs. Noah's name. We don't know their sons. We don't know the spouses' names. Christy, nice to see you. Laura, I see you're here. Paul Martin, nice to see you online. And Rebecca. Sometimes I think that we feel that a real true calling from God is one that is a leadership role. When in fact, God's calling is also one of a support role. And God sometimes calls us into that. Now be careful. I don't think that any of us were destined to be leaders only or support people only. I think depending on the situation and what God is doing in and through us, that at one moment we might be called to be a leader and at one moment we might be called into a support role. And the lesson in all of that for me is still that when God calls us into something that we feel unprepared for, and in fact we are unprepared for, God makes it happen. God brings along the support system for us, or God gives us the leader that we are to support. And somehow it just sort of works. And when you get in the way of God, not in the way of God, hear the difference in inflection? You know, most of the time when we think about getting in the way, it's impeding. But when we get in the way of God, following God, then some pretty mighty things happen through even us feeble little people who are totally unprepared to share the good news of the Creator God. God is amazing. God is greater than we could ever describe. And yet God has allowed us to be ones who describe God. We're not worthy of a relationship with this great Creator. And yet God calls us to not only have a relationship with God, but to help others have a relationship with God. How do you really ever prepare for that? You can't. You just have to get in the way of God. And when you live your life in the way of God, God works a way through you. And of course, the reality is you can get in the way of God. And trust me, if God wants something to happen, it's going to happen. And I think it's pretty cool to be a part of it. And I hope you do too. So at any moment of your life, I want you to be listening, experiencing, sensing how God is calling you. Is it to be a leader in this situation, or is it to be a support role in this situation? And maybe next time you'll be the leader. Maybe next time you'll be the support. I don't know. Most of all, I just want you to know one of the things I remember from the story of Noah and his family and the flood is that though they were not prepared to do what they had to do, they did it with God's help. And when God calls you to do something, God will make that way possible. I'm a living example. So this week, this day, I just invite you to get in the way of God rather than in the way of God. And see how God works a way in your life. Perhaps as a leader, perhaps as a support, but a part of it. Grace and peace to you this day. I hope to see you either in person or online for the memorial service for Bob Therese tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Tucson time, and on Sunday, in person or online, in and from our sanctuary in Fellowship Hall. 8:30 service is back in Fellowship Hall. 10:45 is in the sanctuary. I encourage you to wear masks, to hand sanitize on your way in. The rise in COVID right now is real, and taking those extra precautions can help not only you, but help others. And so I encourage you to do what is right. Bless you all. Have a good, faith-filled Friday. Watch. God's going to call you into something you're not prepared for. Could be a leader, could be as a support system. But God will give you what you need to fulfill that calling. You can trust God. Take care, everybody.